Hi, I'm Tim Clemmer, Head of Open Banking for Enterprise Engineering Inc. And today we're going to talk about what's involved in certifying an API or your API. So if you're putting up an API, you're a bank or a fintech, and you want it certified because you're adhering to some standard or complying to some standard, are you ready? So let's take a look at what's involved. So what's covered when we're certifying an API? Basically, it's three key areas. First and foremost, the elemental foundation parts to an API, the performance, the throughput documentation, then there's security, and then of course is the data itself. So we look at each of these three, and in today's chat here today, we are going to go into each of these three, but I'm going to warn you right now, because of time, we're not going to go in depth into any of these. We'll just sort of give you a sense and a taste of what's involved when we're certifying and how we test each of these areas. So to start with, we look at the performance and throughput. And truthfully, this is not where we start. We'll start with the security and the data, and then we'll test this. But this is really critical, and this is something that you really want to uh, have a handle on before you go into a certification process. So you want to know that your response time is good, and if I'm asking for 7 days worth of data versus 90 or 100 days worth of data or a year, my turnaround time is good to excellent. And why do I need these distinctions? Well, if I'm an existing account and I'm getting data every day for them, then I'm usually only going to get a couple of days worth of data. More than one day because I want overlap, and just to make sure I don't miss anything. And when it's a new account, it's up to the bank or the financial institution as to what they will supply. Typically, a bank will provide 90 days worth of data the first time around. Some banks will provide a year. But if you do that, and I'm requesting thousands of accounts, and you're giving me 90 days worth of data for all those thousands of accounts, got to ensure that my response is happening and good. The other thing we'll look at and question you on is throttling. Will you throttle people? Are there conditions under which you'll throttle people? So, if a fintech has $5 million, 5 million accounts, and another one has 10 million accounts, the second one with 10 may get throttled near the end of the month for making too many requests, whatever. Um, or it may be a nightly thing. You may just have a limit on how much data is going to go through your API and your load balancers on any given night. You may throttle nightly. So we look at whether you cut people off or you just slow them down. What happens? What are the policies around throttling? Your developer portal, we want to make sure that it's easy to use, that it is secure, that it does reflect production. What does your registration process look like? What are the supported endpoints? What percentage of the endpoints in the standard do you cover with your endpoints? Some banks don't do everything, they only do partials, and some may only be able to do partials. So if I don't have investments, there's no way I'm going to give you investment data. So that makes sense, right? I may still be 100%, but I'll give you 100% of my data, but I only may be able to offer 50% of an API. Documentation, is it complete? Do you offer it all? We do almost practically insist that you have some form of these, the Swagger, YAML, JSON file, what have you. And how compliant are you with the standard itself? So in a nutshell, that's where the elemental core part comes down. And again, I can't get into heavy detail on any of these in this particular talk, but future ones I will go into much heavier detail. So now let's take a look at security. So with security, first and foremost, we like to look at your policies. What are your security policies? And Can we see evidence of compliance, or do we just have to go in there and break you? And believe me, that's our job. When we're testing and certifying an API, we are there to break it. And if we can't break it, that's the good news. You want us to break it if it's possible, because it's better we break it than a hacker break it. Then we look at your OAuth. How restrictive is it? How secure is it? What are you doing with certificates, client IDs, and secrets? Are they in a different place from your data? Or is it in a different place from your typical systems? Is it locked down? Can anybody get at it? Who has access to it? These are a lot of things that we look for. Um, and then with tokens, we're looking at refresh rates. We saw one bank that's put the refresh token at a second, which meant every time I went and got a token, I had to go renew it almost immediately. And it was killing their OAuth server, and they're trying to figure that out. It was like, set your refresh rate to a larger amount, and you'll see your pain go away. Then we saw another bank on the other end of the spectrum set a refresh rate over a year. And we're like, guys, that's just not secure. I know people want you to do that way, but that's just not how it works. Typically, you want to see things be just a couple of minutes. That just works a lot better. And then, are you mutual SSL, TLS? What security have you involved? Are you involving? What are your encryption strategies and techniques and decryption? So we go through the whole thing, and that's kind of what we cover with security. Security is a big McGilla, really. One of the things that we have to test there is the whole registration process itself. And with some banks, I could tell you that can be a 30, 40-day thing just to get through the registration process because it's a manual effort. It's not automated. And there are reasons for that, and I have no problem with things being manual. Um, at any rate. And then last but not least, we come to data. And with data, start with formats. Are your responses properly formatted? Are you using the right headers? Are the fields right? Are objects objects and columns columns? Are they all there? Do they disappear? Are they always there? And you may be wondering what I'm referring to there. We've seen some banks tell us that, well, if a field is null, we're just not going to pass it to you. And it was like, no, you can't do that because now I don't know if the field is not there because it's null or it's not there because there's an error on your back end. So that gets back to some of the policies that we discussed earlier in the security section. But that's the kind of stuff we have to look for. Do you adhere to the enumerated values that are in the spec? This may sound obvious to you, but there are banks that will sit there and, I've seen development teams, and I won't say the bank, it was really the development team. They looked at the way the spec enumerated, say, account status, open, closed. Well, they didn't like that. They wanted suspended and terminated and active, and they just changed all the values. And it was like, guys, you can't do that. That's not being in compliance. There's a reason why we have a list of values at the back of the book with, the enumerated values. So date and time, or actually time is a critical one and becoming more critical now with fintechs not being in the same time zone as the banks. So we do see a lot of specs now coming across where they want all dates to have a time element in them, and they want the time element to have a time zone. And that way, more accurately, I know what day these things happened on, and just it's more accurate. Numbers, are you putting minus signs in front, after the number? Are you surrounding it in parentheses? Do you have a field that says this number is positive or negative, and so all numbers are positive? Uh, I mean, you wouldn't believe the amount of variation even in a spec. But then obviously error codes. Error codes is a big deal that you comply with the spec and you have the same reasons that you're giving these error codes. History, how much data are you allowing a, a fintech or an aggregator to get? Some banks only have 90 days online and it's a rolling 90 days. Some banks have years worth of data and you can get it, but you have to get it in chunks, like 50-day chunks. Lots of variability here. What's the maximum amount of data I can request? What's the minimum? Use cases. Do I get enough data to make personal finance viable? Interest rates, principal amounts, balances, all the different balances and interest rates on credit cards, tax preparation. Do I cover all the different forms? 1099 miss, int, div, credit decisioning. Do I get a full-fledged transaction with enough detail to do a credit decisioning on? Same with the accounts and the balances, money movement. So money movement is personal finance, tax prep, credit decisioning, mostly accounting and auditing. It's really, for the most part, read only. But when you get to money movement, that is read write, meaning that I may be sending a transaction to the bank where they're going to change data in-house. So think of a Zelle transaction or a funds transfer from this bank to that bank. Um, if I'm the bank that's the two and I'm getting money in, I have to update my account. If it's $100, I have to update the balance of the account with $100. So that's a write API, and they're usually a little stricter than the read-onlys, and there's tighter integration with those. Um, then accounting, auditing, and last but not least, and boy, oh boy, this one's the critical one, test data. If you think in terms of, I have 5 different account types, and they're across the top and down the side, I have 20 different transaction types. Well, maybe 5 transaction types per account type, and some are shared. I've had banks give me, well, here are 2 account types. And don't worry about the other 3, but here are 2 account types, and here's 4 transactions. Well, it's like, guys, I can't certify you based on that small subset of data. I need transactions across all account types, and I need as many transactions as you can possibly give me just to prove that you actually work, because I can tell you time after time after time, we've not been able to test all the different transaction types. The bank says we're willing to take it on the chin. So we go live, and within hours of going live, we have to shut down because we've hit transaction types that don't work. This is what happens. So that's data. That takes care of data. So I was a little long-winded here, but I tried to briefly give you a overview of what's involved when we certify. This is not to scare you, but just to get you prepped up. It's rigorous, and I hope you found this informative and educational. And thanks so much for listening. Bye.